There are things that we do at home every day that tell you that we are biased when it comes to skin color. When a baby is born, in India, the first thing, of course, people want to know if it's a girl or a boy. But then the next thing people look for is the color of the skin. Just when the baby's born. Just when the baby is born. From day one, parents start speaking negative stuff about the baby's skin color. So just imagine how the child grows up. I saw how it affected the confidence level in girls. That really kind of shocked me. I thought, wow, this is a big issue and no one's talking about it.
I would pray to God every night for lighter skin because my mom told me God performs miracles. So I thought, oh, well, here's one for me. Give me some light skin. Like I had a younger sister who was much lighter. And so every morning I'd wake up and run to the mirror and see whether he answered my prayer. And I'd always be so disappointed.
Hey, welcome to Background Voice, where I speak about whatever comes into my mind. Originally, this was in a podcast format where you could use me as background noise as you went through your daily commute, your chores, or you listened just because you wanted to hear my jumbled brain dump. And I would usually say the intro a lot smoother in the podcast because I could just read off the screen instead of stare at the camera. But now we're a lot more sophisticated because we have footage, so you can actually see me instead of just hear my disembodied voice. Before we get started with today's topic, I just wanted to let you know there are two very important buttons that you need to click. The first one looks like this, and the second one looks like this. Oh, and I do have an Instagram at Background Voice Podcast, so go ahead and check that out as well. Now on with the show. For those who had been following this podcast since last year, you probably have heard my beauty standards episode, where I discussed beauty standards with my friend. It is still up on my YouTube channel, with no video footage, of course, because this is the first video footage episode. But if you would like to hear the full conversation, you can go and check that out. And I will put a link somewhere on YouTube to help out with that. I might even re record the beauty standards episode because we do touch on a lot of topics in that. And yeah, I might re record it and have it in video format, but we will see because that's going to require a lot more work. And I'm quite adverse to work. Anyway, in that episode, I did discuss colorism, not in detail, but we definitely did discuss it for quite a while. And that's why I wanted to do this episode where I do go into a bit more detail on the history and the effects and how we view ourselves due to colorism. And this is a really important topic because it affects many communities around the world. It's not really localized to one place, it's everywhere, pretty much. Yeah, I think it is everywhere actually. So that's why it would be really good to have that conversation. I found colorism really interesting. One of the reasons for that is because growing up, a lot of my white friends would love to go out in the sun and get their tan on and, savor as much of the sunshine as you can get because we live in the UK with barely any sunshine. At the moment, while I'm recording this, it is pouring with rain and it's freezing. But while my friends were going out trying to savor as much of the sun and catch as many rays as they possibly could, I would always try to hide from the sun, stay in the shade, and made sure my contact with the sun was at a minimum. And the reason for doing that was because I didn't want to get dark. But the current me does love my melanated skin, and I do love to go out into the sun and soak up as much sunshine as I can to get that good vitamin D. The best form of getting vitamin D. But yeah, it's definitely strange that there's this contrast. This contrast where white people try to catch as much sunshine and sun rays as possible to get that nice bronze complexion, while people of color try to dodge sun rays to stay as fair as possible. These are my observations, but it does seem to be a shared observation because I've seen many posts about it on a lot of South Asian Instagrams and a lot of people speaking up about it as well. So I thought, why not join the conversation and add facts and also my own experiences to the plethora of things out there on the internet. I'll also link some of the resources that I used below in the whatever it's called, detail box, dialogue box of information, something. But I will link anything that I found really useful while researching for this episode. There were also quite a few videos that I watched to prepare for this episode. So I will link those videos below as well. And here are a few of my standout favorite ones that I would really recommend that you go and watch. Firstly, like always, let's define what colorism is for those who don't know. This is basically discrimination based on the color of someone's skin, usually favoring those with a lighter skin tone. Light skin tones are typically linked to positive traits such as wealth and beauty, while darker skin tones are usually given more negative connotations such as poverty and unattractiveness. Colorism can be seen within ethnic/racial communities or between communities. Basically, very few communities seem to be free of having to deal with colorism. I think there's only one racial community that doesn't seem to face colorism, and I think we all know who that is. A lot of people seem to think that colorism comes from the desire of POCs to look white. Although this might be the case for some communities, it's definitely not the whole cause, definitely not half of it, and definitely not all of it. It's just part of it. I've split the causes into two. The first was pre colonialism, and this cause has continued into today, where those who are poorer would need to perform manual labor in the sun, thus getting darker, while nobility and those from wealthier backgrounds would have less sun exposure. The concept is similar to how in modern Western society, if you have a tan, it's linked to you being richer. Um, Obviously, only if you're white, not if you're a person of color. But if you can have a tan, it just means that you can go abroad, or it suggests that you can go abroad and travel, and you have disposable income for that. Obviously, it wasn't the case that tan equaled wealth historically, because back in like the Victorian era, the Georgian era, the Tudor era, people wanted to have paler skin. For similar reasons that I'm going to explain, it was a very similar concept around the world of having manual labor, being exposed to the sun meant that your skin would get darker. So yeah, it was just all classism. And the second reason is colonialism. Moment of silence there. Something I found really interesting was that ancient India, so that included today's India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. So ancient India actually went through two major colonizations. The first was when the Aryans invaded India and took over the darker skinned Dravidians. Following this initial invasion, there was a succession of other invasions from like the Persians, the Mughals, and of course, the Europeans. So it is theorized that these series of colonizations has led to subliminal conditioning of South Asians to believe that fairer and lighter skin tones would equal power and success. And of course, similar patterns have taken place in places like Africa. However, it was only in the 18th century that there was an emphasis put on your skin tone and skin color. And having a lighter skin tone became indicative of having higher morality and intellect. This was a tactic used by Europeans back then to justify their torture and enslavement of Africans and then later on of South Asians. So, although colorism had existed pre colonization, this colonial mindset ended up strengthening the idea that light skin equals good, dark skin equals bad. And thus, there was this unofficial hierarchy amongst people of color. Though I do want to point out there are some places in the world where colorism is pretty much directly and solely related to European colonization. For example, in the Philippines during Spanish rule, a hierarchy was created with the Spanish at the top, followed by mixed and then Filipinos at the bottom. Due to this hierarchy, there was an increased desire to appear fair in order to look mixed and thus gain a higher social status. We tend to see more fair skinned people in media than we do those with darker skin. Of course, this is slowly changing now, but it's quite a recent change and we still have a long way to go, especially because it does seem like a trope in a lot of movies across various medias. When I say various medias, I mean Hollywood, Bollywood, Collywood, Tollywood, Nollywood, all the woods. It seems to be a trope where they have the fair skinned character as the love interest. And she's the amazing, delicate heroine. I don't really know how to pronounce that word. I'm going to be completely honest. I hear it pronounced as heroine in Tamil movies, but then I hear it pronounced as heroine here in the UK. But like, the UK version does have two meanings, and I don't really want to get it wrong. So if someone could tell me which is the right way to pronounce it, I would be eternally grateful. Thanks. Anyway, fair skinned girls usually are the main character, whereas darker skinned girls are given more comedic roles. And I've definitely noticed this a lot in Tamil films. I literally cannot think of a dark skinned actress that gets lead roles, and most of these actresses are brought over from North India because of their lighter complexion, or they get a white girl to pretend to be a brown girl. But there's definitely not a shortage of darker skinned actresses because they never seem to have a shortage of them when it comes to playing roles such as maids, villainesses, the stupid but well meaning friend, or background characters. Now, those that haven't experienced colorism might be going, okay, and just get over it, get a thicker skin. And this is actually something I've heard back when I was at uni. It wasn't something that was said to me. It was just something that was said like within the group as part of a discussion. Didn't know who this person was. Don't know what they're doing today. Probably still being colorist, but not everyone learns. At the time, I had a really bad response. My response was to not respond and just sit there awkwardly and hope that someone would say something that was eloquent. And I didn't really know what to say at the time as well. And then a few hours later, when I was sleeping in bed, I came up with the best response ever. So, yeah, happens to the best of us. So, anyway, maybe this episode is a low key passive aggressive response to them about 5 years later. Not something I would put past myself. So, yeah, this is dedicated to you, random person that I never met again after that one interaction. There have been many studies done on the effect of colorism, and most of the studies I've had a look at were for the Black community. though the effects have been suggested to be very similar in Asia, um, and for Asians here that live in the West. So, what did they find? Well, there's a wage gap between dark and light skinned people. This gap ranged between 16 to 25%, as well as lighter skinned people receiving more opportunities for promotions or even to get a job. One thing I found really shocking was during the slave trade, those who had lighter skin were more likely to escape from slavery and were more likely to receive an education because they were given preferential treatment. And this basically sent out the message that even if you weren't white, the whiter you were, the better. Or maybe I should say are, because it still is the case today. Also, during my research, I came across a very heartbreaking experiment conducted by psychologists Mami and Kenneth Clark. This test was known as Barbie doll test, and admittedly, it was actually conducted to look at how children reacted and perceived different races. But the test itself was then repurposed more recently by a university to look at how children reacted to different skin tones. So in this test, there were three dolls. One doll was white, one doll was black, and one doll had a complexion that was kind of in between. The children were asked which doll was beautiful, which doll was good, and which doll was bad. Here's a clip from the experiment.
More than half of the children said white Barbie was prettiest. Half of the children said the black Barbie was bad.
As you saw, a majority of the children picked the white doll as good and beautiful, while the black doll was considered bad. What was worse to see was that the children of color had internalized this idea at such a young age to a point that they were also picking the dolls of darker complexion for negative traits, even though those dolls more closely represented them and looked more similar to them. And and as you can probably guess, there are some people out there that saw this internalized colorism as a great way to make a quick buck by turning it into a multi-billion-dollar industry. The skin lightening industry has been valued at around $20 billion. And if you haven't seen the ads that they produce, well, count yourself lucky because they're not great. The most famous brand is Fair and Lovely, and they get endorsements by very, very big names. The general premise of all these brands are the same. You usually get a girl or a guy who's failing in life. Then their fairer friend will suggest a skin lightening brand for them to win at life. Can you hear the ridiculousness in that? They're being so bait about the fact that they think that light is good and dark is bad, and that you're gonna be on the streets and unable to do anything if you're dark skinned. Like, come on, is that really the case? Now that I've gone through the definitions and the basics and the history, I do want to go through my experiences as well. I have this weird mix of experiencing colorism, but also not experiencing colorism because I'm not really considered dark as a Tamil. So within my community, I don't really experience colorism that much. But going outside of my community while staying within the South Asian community, I have heard the occasional comments about my skin tone. My dad is dark skinned and my mum is light skinned. I sort of inherited this lighter skin tone, but not majorly light, like I'm still dark. And because of that, I wouldn't hear as many comments as other kids did. And for all my South Asians out there, you know how brutal the comments can get. Kids were told that they were getting dark and that they should stay out of the sun and start using skin bleaching products at a very young age. And that's just not it. A kid should not have to worry about how they look or what their skin looks like or how dark they're getting. They're a kid. It should really be carefree years. They should be able to do what they want, obviously, safely, not anything that they want. Like, I take that statement back. They should be able to do what they want within safe guidelines. And they should not be made insecure about who they are and what they look like. Over time, I did start to get darker because I traveled more. I went camping, and during the summers, I really did enjoy going outside and just soaking up some sun. I think I've said soaking up the sun and sun rays way too many times in this episode, but hey, it's fine. We're near the end. You can deal with it if I say it a few more times. Luckily for me, my parents don't really follow this you have to be fair ideology. When I would go to Sri Lanka, people would gift me skin bleaching products. And when I was younger, I was naive and used these products. A PSA for younger listeners: don't ever use these, especially if you're young. Your body is still growing, and with that growth, your skin is also doing its thing. So, skin bleaching products can really mess with that, and they are super harmful because of all the chemicals. Also, like I mentioned, I am darker than a lot of my South Asian friends, so they're much fairer than me. A couple of so called friends when I was growing up would make comments about how it was darker and therefore less attractive. Sometimes some of them would compare their skin with mine just to validate their fairness. And over time, I internalized this, and this internalization lasted a while, like a good chunk of years. Like, this is really embarrassing, but I did when I was younger make jokes about how I was really dark and like make degrading jokes about myself just to stop people having a chance to do it. Um and now I do state that I'm darker because I'm dark. So what? It shouldn't really have any connotation with it. It's just an adjective. Um but yeah, back then it was when I would make that statement, I would make it with a very different mindset, which was not as accepting of how I look. So basically, when I was younger, I was using the laugh at yourself advice, but in the wrong context. And I was basically unintentionally encouraging colorism. But then I started to see loads of girls embracing their skin tone on things like Instagram. And it was uplifting. They didn't care. People still thought they were beautiful. They were beautiful. They are beautiful. And, it is empowering to be able to see people do that. And it does empower you to feel like that about yourself. And that's why I think representation is so, so important, because it ends up showing you that you do fit in and that you're not the only one, even if it feels like that. So, respect to those girls, and I support you. It's so, so sad that colorism exists. As if having to deal with racism wasn't enough, we have to deal with discrimination within our own communities. But to be completely honest, just embrace your skin tone. Like, honestly, it's not going to change. And if it does change, it's usually through very harmful methods that you will regret in the future. And I understand that embracing yourself is a hard process, and it does take a lot of time, a lot of internal work, and a lot of understanding yourself. But make sure you love yourself regardless of what the world is telling you, because honestly, a lot of the time, the world's only telling you things to sell you things. Capitalism. So just remember that you're beautiful and empowered. But yeah. But then again, I'm just saying what's on my mind. What do you think?